Okay, now that we've learned all of those challenges and all of those solutions for optimization, and we put everything together in the last lab, and we saw how everything works on the how do we do it, we will wrap up the day today with some more discussion on the first main axis. What do we optimize, right? Remember, we had two things. What do we optimize? How do we optimize it? We've spent a lot of time on the how, but I think it's important to go back and discuss a few challenges at some more depth on the what. Okay? So, ethical concerns. Whatever choices we make when designing a machine learning system, it bakes biases into it, right? The end for today, what we care about are those objective functions that we choose to optimize. And remember those unintended consequences and the perverse incentives that we saw in the very first section of today. Okay, the cobras and the boat driven by reinforcement learning to do crazy loops instead of running the race. So there's all sorts of biases that can lead to unintended consequences. Some of those biases can stem from the data. If we collect historical data to make decisions for modern day, we're going to adopt some biases or imbalances or whatever traditions and tendencies existed in that historical data, right? Some of the biases that we introduce and the consequences that come with them come from the objective functions or the loss functions that we select. So here's a big example. This was big news a few years ago, and it's still going on, right? So some regions of the world with some counties and states in the United States leading the way have decided to use machine learning to add some level of automation to their judicial system, right? Sometimes the courts are overloaded, and it's useful to have someone very quickly take a look at the file and tell you, well, this is a serious case because there's the risk of recidivism. Basically, the risk that this particular person will commit another crime, for example. First of all, that sounds like a very, very controversial use of these technologies, machine learning, and personally it makes me quite uncomfortable knowing how those things work, to rely on machine learning for such serious matters. But second, also, there's the question of how do we do it, okay? So this is a very interesting article here, and the discussion that I've borrowed again from Lyle's excellent discussion from his UPenn lectures for this last section. So the discussion there is, which is very interesting, is that some states are already using some kind of machine learning to do some kind of pre-processing of all those folders, of all those cases of people accused of crimes, and their trial is pending, or their conviction has already happened, and now they're ready for sentencing. So someone appears in front of a judge for sentencing, and they have these automated systems as the first step of the process, which will assign risk scores. Okay, so the accused has a risk score of 9 out of 10 or 3 out of 10. Which risk scores are supposed to be used when sentencing? Are we going to give parole or probation to this particular accused or convicted? Or are we going to send them to jail? And what should their sentence be? So already in some parts of the world, the judges use those scores that come from those automated methods. They take them into account when making sentencing decisions. And how do they do that, right? In some of those systems, for example, which is very interesting, they will go in and they will design a system using historical data from arrests. So essentially, the system will tell you this person has a high likelihood of getting arrested again, and this person has a lower likelihood of getting arrested again. But even if you accept to use this kind of system in the judicial system, this is already the wrong objective, right? Why? Because the probability of getting arrested is not the same as the probability of getting convicted. So there's a lot of discussion here, and that takes us back to our original discussion. What is our objective function? By choosing the objective function of probability of arrest, this is what we're focusing on. We are essentially favoring much more strongly any inherent biases or systemic biases that might have existed in the data. So the public discourse right now is in the United States, black people have been arrested disproportionately high related to the number of crimes they commit. So if you have this historical inequality in how the police operates, potentially or presumably arresting blacks at a higher rate compared to the number of crimes they commit, then having a system that predicts the probability of arrest instead of predicting the probability of committing a crime, which has its own problems, perpetuate existing biases in the system. So there's a whole big discussion. This is a big can of worms, like the use of machine learning systems on such serious societal issues and such serious decisions that have effects on people's lives opens up a big discussion, which is important for us machine learning engineers to have in mind, right? And to always keep in mind the consequences of our decisions. Our objective function has some consequences, right? So there's this whole new field which is fascinating, and it's very challenging because it involves non-technical ideas and non-technical methodology, which is the area of algorithmic fairness. There's already some great material here, even though it's a nascent discipline. And there's a nice book by Michael Kearns and Aaron Roth. And the typical setting is that you identify for some important applications, you can identify a protected class and the general population. If you suspect that in a population there's a group that is underrepresented or traditionally suffers from inequality, for example, you might try to measure and understand the fairness or lack thereof in your system, right? And there's a number of objectives you can talk about. You can talk about prediction accuracy and saying that I want these two groups, I want my machine learning algorithms to have the same prediction accuracy in these two groups. Or I want the same false positive rate in the two groups. Or I want the percentage of true responses, if we're doing binary classification, to be the same in the two groups. Not all of them make sense in all of those applications. Furthermore, we have things like, or limitations like, you're not allowed to use a label that tells you that this is a member of the protected class or this is a member of the general population. So if we're not allowed to use this information in our decision, for example, we're not allowed to use gender when trying to do targeted ads, for example. We have an example coming up. These restrictions make this discussion and this methodology much more challenging. So a very interesting result from the early days of this discipline is that these criteria that I just enumerated are incompatible. That means that it's mathematically impossible to simultaneously satisfy or optimize all of these things. To have the same prediction accuracy in the general population and protected class, to have the same false positive rate, for example, and have the same percentage level, true, etc. So there's always some tough decisions to be made, decisions that are not technical, okay? And decisions that can have serious impact when those applications are societal, right? So a lot to be done, a lot to discuss, and a lot to think about. So as a last example, it's a recent thing, for example, that Facebook stopped overtly allowing targeted ads. It used to be that I could target a very specific population. I want to hire someone who is male in this age gap, or who is female and is younger than 30 years old. In some countries, including countries in North America, this kind of targeting is illegal. You cannot target specific ages or specific genders for hiring, right? So this is a very recent development that companies like Facebook stopped doing it because there were some lawsuits. But there's still, even if you don't do it overtly, it's still possible to infer some of those attributes of a person by their browsing history, by their likes, their dislikes, their comments, etc. It's still possible to very accurately predict their gender, right? Or predict their age. Still, it is illegal to use it to target them with ads. So you end up in a difficult situation, a difficult gray zone, where this information is retrievable if you want to, but it's still not okay to use it. So, and it's also not clear whether some actors are still using this information or not. Predicting and using. So a lot there to be done, a lot there to be discussed. These examples are just to give you some idea that a lot of the choices that we make, and most of the choices that we make when designing a machine learning system, have impact and consequences that we sometimes do not understand, okay? And that can be, sometimes those consequences can be bad. We have to keep an eye out for those unintended consequences, take a critical look into our results, and if possible, discuss with domain experts in cases where it makes sense. And otherwise, have fun. Be mindful and have fun. That's the end of our day today. Thank you for your patience, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the lectures in the Academy. Take care.